So Wonder Woman was one of those movies that for some reason I was just never that excited about. The trailers were good enough, but nothing attention stealing, and I was convinced that the leading actress behind the Wonder Woman role herself was ill-fitting. So against the grain, I hesitated seeing it at first. But then the reviews started coming in, and boy, were they good. Praise, praise, and more praise. Everybody was loving it. This piqued my curiosity, and before I knew it, I was sitting in the cinema, waiting for it to begin. By this point, I'd completely turned around too, and my expectations were soaring. And with all that being said, I was honestly left just a little disappointed. Man, I'm gonna get some hate for this review, aren't I? I'm Jack Fitzpatrick, and this is my review of Wonder Woman. Now, don't get me wrong, this is far from a terrible film. In fact, I even liked it quite a lot. There's a big counterpoint to that, though, and that's that it's far from a life-changing, groundbreaking, or earth-shattering film. It's just good. And that's about it. It's solid. It's a solid movie. But I didn't love it. Inherently, the overall feel and structure of the film was generic. It was really just your average superhero movie. A good middle-tier superhero flick, which honestly begs the question, what's with all the praise? And I know what it is. Let's not pretend we don't know what it is. This is a female-led superhero film. It's a big deal, and I get it, and I even agree. Though we've had them before, and women have been action stars before, this is the first real female superhero movie. It's the first big and successful one of the modern cinematic era anyway. And that's great, and I'm glad to see it, and I'm glad there's more coming, and I hope that soon enough, it won't even be a notable detail anymore. Hopefully soon, we don't think of it as being a female superhero movie, and we just think of it as being a superhero movie. My issue, though, is that everybody who is praising the hell out of this movie is actually really just praising that issue. It's great to see a woman be the lead, and it's great to have a strong female superhero, but it doesn't make for flawless cinema. And we can appreciate these facts, but still acknowledge the imperfections. And I don't really think that a lot of people are doing that, and I guess that's where I come in. So let me just start off by saying that this movie primarily felt like a mix between Captain America, the First Avenger, and even more so in my mind, the first Thor film. We get a good mix of god-based and mythological characters and story, along with the World War I setting, which really do make for a fun experience. And just to really compare it to Marvel's entries, I gotta talk action, because there was of course really satisfying stuff in this. Things like Wonder Woman's bulletproof bracer things on her arms, the abundant uses of slow motion, and of course, speaking of the setting, the scene in which Wonder Woman infiltrates No Man's Land. It seems like this where Wonder Woman really shines as a fun action film, although sometimes it could look slightly silly, what with Wonder Woman leaping superhuman lengths and wearing the silly costume in a serious and realistic looking setting. Overall, I'd say that the action scenes worked. Visually, it was all up to standard too. The colors popped, the camera loomed over the action, and Wonder Woman came off as a badass character. The opening battle scene also plays along with this, as well as the little bits of action throughout. But it's not really anything that we haven't seen before. The action was fun, but far from refreshing. What was refreshing, however, was the fact that there was actually far fewer action scenes than I think you'd expect from a film like this. The movie felt like it had some restraint in this regard, holding off of the explosiveness and really focusing primarily on its story and lead character. This proved to be a slightly more maturely focused film that we've seen in this DC franchise before. Speaking of the lead character though, I just have to have a real hot take here. One of my biggest issues with this movie is still the fact that I think it's been miscast. I really don't love however you say her name. I know that's the joke everybody says. Gal Gadot, that's her name, whatever, as Diana. I can't quite explain why, but there is just something to her as well as the writing that makes her come off as kind of awkward to me. And not in the cutesy naive way in which the film obviously intended, but rather just kind of in an odd way. The actual writing of Wonder Woman herself also feels just slightly off. Everybody is praising her naivety, but I'd just say that that was actually a little too strong. She came off as kind of dumb, which kind of bothered me as she's meant to represent and be the big strong female of this film, right? But she had to constantly be explained things, and I get that inherently this comes with the fish out of water style of story that this film was based around, but it just felt a little contradictory. Don't get me wrong, it's not like she's completely off her head stupid, but I could have done with her being portrayed in a slightly more clever way. She just seems kind of childish. Speaking of the likability of the characters though, I do have to talk about Chris Pine's Steve Trevor, because I have to say he's pretty damn likable in this movie. He has this sort of arrogant charm, but with obvious heroic intentions. I also appreciate that they didn't make him a bumbling fool to compensate for Wonder Woman's competency. The two were equals. The one thing that I'd say I didn't like about the choices made around the character though is that I didn't much care for the romantic aspect between he and Diana throughout. I just wasn't feeling it. It wasn't organic. A romantic relationship between the two characters just felt unnecessary to begin with. Can't Wonder Woman just be a strong character on her own? The shoehorning of a relationship sort of cheapened it all. Something else that I really did like about the movie is that it majorly kept to itself in regard to the rest of the franchise that it belongs to. It didn't constantly attempt to set up other crap for future films, and it did feel like it was just aiming to tell its own story and nothing more. However, this also meant that it didn't really do anything in terms of progressing the franchise. The world of DC before and after Wonder Woman is still in the exact same position. But to be fair, it's not like every superhero movie I like tells an essential story. Sometimes they're just a good time. I think that's all Wonder Woman really needed to be anyway, and maybe it's exactly what the DC films need at the moment. But now it's time to really talk about what I didn't like about this film, my real issues with it all. That's right, folks, it's bitching time. So let me start off this segment by talking about the real major problem with this film. The third act. It all really begins to fall apart come the third act. The film really screws things up with the seeming obligatory CGI god fight finale that just didn't belong in comparison to all that came before it. As far as I knew, this was meant to be a much more grounded film and we were supposed to be taking Wonder Woman seriously. But then it all just becomes kind of a cartoon, and the most green screen filled fight you've ever seen ensues. And it's here where the film just completely loses me. I've seen this before, and just to make it even worse, I've seen Wonder Woman do this before. It's just not what the movie needed. This wasn't all that was wrong with the third act though. Another major issue for me was the supposed clever twist that some guy that we'd seen an hour ago in the film turned out to be the big bad guy that we'd been hearing the name of multiple times throughout. For one, this wasn't a clever twist. The character wasn't big enough for it to be significant, but also it was the only other actor that I actually recognized in that boardroom earlier anyway, so if I really thought about it, I probably could have guessed. But what really shits me is that it was entirely pointless anyway. The big bad villain, Ares, shouldn't have been in the film at all to begin with. Diana should have just been plain wrong. The fact that Ares was behind it all and that she was right all along entirely undermines Steve Trevor's whole argument about how some people are just bad and obliterates Diana's one big lesson that she'd learned in the film. The fact that you can't just fix the world and all its problems by beating one random bad guy, that the world is more complicated than that. This entire argument is blown out of the water by having Diana be right. Instead of that lesson being learned, she instead does defeat one random bad guy and this actually does fix the world. It's ridiculous, it's childish. She should have just been wrong. A character can still be a hero and can still be smart even if they're wrong. It wouldn't have compromised Wonder Woman as a whole, it just would have humanized her a little. But of course the film didn't take that approach, and by this point she becomes less and less relatable as a character. And speaking of the twist revolving around Ares and the entire battle against him, I also have to say that the character was entirely wasted anyway. He came into a film that he didn't belong in. This film wasn't about bombastic craziness. It was meant to be about the characters, and was for the most part. Including Ares was just jarring. It took away from a potential role in a later, better suiting film. In this, he was introduced and killed within like half an hour. He didn't have the time to boil as a villain. We didn't hate him. Hell, we didn't even know him. We heard some ghost stories about him from Diana's perspective and about how horrible he is, but we're never shown it. It's smoke and mirrors and he's a nothing character. Anyway, Wonder Woman was a solid movie. It was kind of generic as a superhero film, but nonetheless solid. The lead character proved to be pretty cool, however was constantly compromised by some awkward writing, as well as the fact that I still don't have too much confidence in Gal Gadot, whatever, as a lead actress. That being said, she did feel like a heroic character. The movie also held up its pace without losing focus. It had some fun humor in it, and it felt a little more in the vein of Marvel rather than DC, which isn't exactly a bad thing. Look, I have my complaints, my nitpicks, and my problems, but in the end, this movie was better than what DC has been chucking out in the last few years. It did get me sort of excited to see more from the franchise, and I hope it just gets better from here with each coming movie. I'm excited for Justice League, and these films are still hanging on to that shred of potential. I would rate Wonder Woman a 7.75 out of 10.